The alarm bells rang loud across the space station as Commander Tejo ran through the metal hallways. His boots made heavy sounds on the floor while red warning lights flashed everywhere. The Galactic Defense Station was humanity's last safe place in this part of space, and now the enemy was coming. Tejo reached the command center where dozens of people worked at glowing screens. The main display showed something that made his heart sink. Hundreds of dark ships were moving toward them like a giant wave of death. These were Vex ships, and they had already destroyed 12 human worlds. The Vex were not like any enemy humans had ever fought before. They were part machine and part living creature. Their ships looked like giant insects made of metal and flesh. Green light pulsed through them like blood through veins. When they attacked a planet, they did not just kill the people. They turned everything into empty dead rock. Lieutenant Jiwoo stood near the big window looking out at the approaching enemy fleet. She was small and young, only 22 years old, but she had already proven herself in battle many times. The other pilots called her Little Thunder because she was fast and deadly in her fighter ship. Her black hair was tied back and her dark eyes were calm, even though death was coming. Tejo walked over to her and said, "Jiwoo, we need to talk. The enemy has too many ships. We cannot win this fight in the normal way." Jiwoo turned to look at him. Her face was serious, but not afraid. "Commander, I have been thinking about the same thing. There is one way we might stop them, but it is very dangerous." "What do you mean?" Tejo asked, though he already knew what she was thinking. "The prototype fighter in Hangar Bay 7, Jiwoo said. It has a special weapon system that can create a big explosion, but someone would have to fly it right into the enemy flagship and trigger it from inside. Their main ship is like the brain of their whole fleet. If we destroy it, the other ships might stop working." Tejo shook his head. "No, Jiwoo. That would be suicide. The pilot would never make it out alive." "I know," Jiwoo said quietly. "But if we do nothing, the Vex will destroy this station and then move on to Earth. Millions of people will die. Commander, someone has to make this choice." Before Tejo could say anything else, the station shook as enemy weapons hit the outer shields. Sparks flew from damaged control panels, and the lights flickered. People shouted orders and warnings. As more Vex ships arrived, the enemy was getting closer. Through the window, they could see the massive Vex flagship. It was bigger than any human ship ever built. Twisted metal arms reached out from its sides like the legs of a giant spider. Green energy crackled between them. The ship was so large it blocked out the stars behind it. Jiwoo looked at the enemy ship and said, "I can do this, Commander. I know I can. The prototype fighter is fast enough to get through their defenses, and I am the best pilot on this station. That is exactly why I cannot let you go." Tejo said, "You are too valuable to lose. No one is too valuable if losing them saves everyone else." Jiwoo replied. She turned to face him and her eyes were determined. "Commander, you know this is the only way. We are out of time and out of options." Another explosion shook the station, and this time the main power went out for a few seconds. Emergency lights came on, casting everything in a red glow. When the main lights returned, many of the control screens were broken. The station was dying. Tejo looked around at his crew. They were all young people who had volunteered to defend humanity against the Vex invasion. Some were barely out of school, but they worked at their stations, without fear. He thought about all the human worlds that had already fallen and all the people who had died. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right, Jiwoo. But you take the best equipment we have. And if you see any chance to escape after triggering the weapon, you take it." Jiwoo smiled for the first time that day. "Thank you, Commander. I will not let you down." She ran toward the hangar bay while Tejo watched from the command center. The prototype fighter was sleek and silver, much smaller than the regular military ships. It had been built for speed and stealth with experimental engines that could make it move faster than anything else in space. Jiwoo climbed into the cockpit and started the engines. The sound was different from normal fighters, higher and more powerful. She spoke into her radio. "This is Little Thunder requesting launch permission." "Permission granted," Tejo said into his microphone. "Good luck, Jiwoo. Bring our girl home." The hangar bay doors opened, and Jiwoo shot out into space, like a silver arrow. The Vex ships immediately noticed her, and dozens of them turned to attack. Green laser beams filled the space around her, but she twisted and spun through them like she was dancing. Her ship was so fast, it looked like a blur. Everyone on the station watched as Ji-woo flew straight toward the massive enemy flagship. Vex fighter ships tried to stop her, but she was too quick. She destroyed 3 of them with her weapons, then spun around 2 more that tried to block her path. Enemy flagship began firing its biggest weapons at her. Giant beams of green energy reached out like fingers trying to crush her ship, but Ji-woo kept moving, always one step ahead. She was like a small bird flying through a storm of lightning. As she got closer to the flagship, its weapons became more accurate. One beam nearly hit her, and the heat from it damaged her ship's outer hull. Another beam grazed her wing, and sparks flew from the damaged metal, but she kept flying straight toward the enemy. The flagship had an opening in its center where smaller ships could dock. Ji-woo aimed for this opening, flying faster than she had ever flown before. Enemy fighters followed her, firing everything they had, but she was almost there. Just as she reached the opening, something went wrong. The Vex had been waiting for her. A massive energy pulse erupted from inside the flagship, much bigger than anything they had used before. The pulse was so powerful it lit up the entire star system room. The station Taeho and his crew watched in horror as a ball of white light engulfed both Ji-woo's fighter and the enemy flagship. The light was so bright they had to look away. When it finally faded, both ships were gone. Only pieces of metal floating in space remained. The other Vex ship stopped moving for several minutes, as if they could not believe what had happened. Then slowly, they began to retreat back toward the edge of the star system. Ho closed his eyes and spoke into the station. Wide communication system, Lieutenant Ji-woo died today, saving all of us. She will be remembered as a hero who gave everything to protect humanity. But deep in space, among the floating debris, something strange was happening. Pieces of the destroyed ships were glowing with the same green light that had powered the Vex technology. And somewhere in that light, something that had once been Ji-woo was beginning to change. Dr. Ye-jin finished building the quantum anchor after 2 weeks of non-stop work. The device looked like a silver sphere covered in glowing blue circuits. It hummed with energy that made the air around it vibrate. When she activated it, Ji-woo appeared, instantly in the laboratory, as if she had been waiting. "The anchor works perfectly," Ji-woo said, touching the device with her glowing hand. "Now I can manifest anywhere in the galaxy within seconds. I can feel the entire collective consciousness, like a vast ocean of thoughts and memories." Commander Taeho arrived at the secret laboratory with a small fleet of human resistance ships. He had been planning coordinated attacks on Vex positions, but now with Ji-woo back, everything could change. They met in the main conference room where holographic star charts showed Vex-controlled territory. Ji-woo stood at the center of the room, her form flickering between solid and translucent as she accessed the alien network. In real time, she could see every Vex ship, every base, every patrol route across dozens of star systems. The information flowed through her mind like a river of data. "Here is what we will do," Ji-woo said, pointing to the star chart. "I will strike at their command centers while your fleets attack their outer defenses. When their commanders are gone, the biomechanical warriors will not know how to respond effectively." Taeho studied the battle plan. It was ambitious beyond anything they had attempted before. Simultaneous attacks on 12 different star systems using information that no human spy could have gathered. But if it worked, it would cripple the Vex war machine. The first target was the Vega system, where the Vex had built a massive shipyard that produced their biomechanical warriors. While Taeho led a fleet toward the outer defenses, Ji-woo materialized inside the main construction facility. The Vex workers saw her appear like a ghost, made of light and energy. They fired their plasma weapons, but the beams passed through her without effect. She moved through the facility, touching key systems and watching them overload and explode. Behind her, biomechanical assembly lines shut down permanently. At the same time, human fighters engaged the Vex defense fleet. The alien ships fought with their usual precision, but something was wrong. Their coordination was failing as Ji-woo systematically destroyed their communication networks. From the command ship, Taeho watched enemy formations break apart in confusion. The pattern repeated across multiple star systems. Jiwoo would appear without warning, in the most heavily defended Vex installations, moving through their security like it did not exist. She never killed unnecessarily. Instead, she targeted the systems that the aliens needed to maintain their empire. On the world of Rigel 7, she appeared in the central data processing center where the Vex stored tactical information about human defenses. The biomechanical guards could not even see her as she walked between them, touching their quantum computers and watching years of intelligence data disappear. The psychological effect was devastating. Vex commanders, who had never known defeat, suddenly found themselves fighting an enemy they could not understand or predict. Their warriors started reporting ghost sightings and system failures. Biomechanical soldiers began shutting down from stress. Commander Sektar was one of the most feared Vex leaders. He had conquered 18 different worlds and had never lost a single battle. But now he sat in his flagship staring at reports that made no sense. How could one human destroy installations that required entire armies to assault? The human phantom appeared and disappeared. At will, she knew the location of every secret base, the schedule of every supply convoy, the weakness of every defensive system. It was as if she could read the minds of every Vex in the galaxy. What Sektar did not know was that Jiwoo could indeed access the thoughts and memories of every being connected to the collective consciousness. She saw through their eyes, heard through their ears, and knew their plans before they made them. The terror spread through Vex space like a plague. Biomechanical warriors who had been bred for war and conquest began experiencing emotions their species had forgotten. Fear, doubt, uncertainty. These feelings made them weak and unreliable in battle. On the mining world of Titan III, an entire Vex garrison abandoned their posts after Jiwoo appeared in their barracks. She had not attacked them or even spoken. Instead, she had simply walked through their sleeping quarters, touching each warrior gently on the forehead. The touched warriors woke up with memories that were not their own. They remembered being human or crystalline or any of dozens of other species that the Vex had absorbed. They remembered having families, homes, dreams that had nothing to do with conquest and war. Some of these awakened biomechanical soldiers began questioning their orders. Others simply walked away from their duties. The Vex command structure started falling apart as more and more warriors rediscovered their original identities. The rebellion spread to other enslaved species. Across the galaxy, the Crystalline Confederacy had been forced to serve the Vex for 50 years, but now, their workers in the quantum mines began sabotaging equipment. The marsh dwellers of Europa started attacking their Vex overseers with primitive weapons. Even some Vex hybrids began to rebel. These were creatures that had been partially converted but still retained some original consciousness. They had been used as translators and go-betweens, but now they turned against their creators. Jiwoo appeared to resistance groups across the galaxy, offering them information about Vex weaknesses and coordinating their attacks. A single consciousness that existed everywhere at once became the rallying point for dozens of different species fighting for freedom. The Vex empire that had seemed unstoppable just months before was now crumbling from within. Their biomechanical technology that had made them superior to every other species became a weakness when those same systems were turned against them. Taeho watched the progress from his command ship as reports came in from across the galaxy. Vex fleets were retreating to their core worlds, abandoning outer territories that they could no longer defend. The aliens who had conquered half the galaxy were now afraid to leave their strongest fortresses, but Jiwoo knew that the real battle was still to come. The Vex overmind, the central intelligence that controlled the entire collective consciousness, was hidden in their home system. It was there that the final confrontation would take place. During a brief moment when she materialized on Taeho's ship, Jiwoo explained what they were facing. The overmind is not just a computer or a biomechanical construct. It is the original consciousness that created the Vex Empire. It has been alive for thousands of years and it will not give up easily. "What do you need from us?" Taeho asked. "I need you to keep the Vex fleets busy while I face the overmind directly," Jiwoo said. "This battle will be fought in the quantum realm as much as in normal space. I may not be able to maintain physical form while fighting it." The human fleet began moving toward the Vex home system for the final battle. Behind them, Dozens of liberated worlds celebrated their freedom. But everyone knew that the war was not over yet. The most dangerous enemy still waited in the heart of Vex space. Jiwoo prepared herself for a confrontation that would determine the fate of every conscious being in the galaxy. She had evolved beyond death itself, but now she would face the ancient intelligence that had created the biomechanical nightmare. The hunt was almost over. Dr. Hyojin worked day and night in her secret laboratory on the dead planet Proxima 7. The place had once been a beautiful world with blue oceans and green forests, but the Vex had drained all life from it years ago. Now it was just gray rock and empty cities, which made it the perfect hiding place for her research. She had been studying captured Vex technology for 2 years, trying to understand how the biomechanical aliens worked. The creatures were part living tissue and part quantum computer. Each Vex warrior was connected to something they called the collective consciousness, a vast network that linked every living being they had ever captured or converted. Hyojin discovered that this network was not just for communication. It was like a giant brain that stretched across the entire galaxy. Every thought, every memory, every piece of knowledge from billions of conquered species was stored inside it. The Vex used this information to become better at war and conquest with each world they destroyed. But something strange had happened 3 months ago when Jiwoo crashed into the Vex flagship. The quantum readings from that explosion were unlike anything Hyojin had ever seen. The energy released had created ripples through the collective consciousness that were still spreading across the galaxy. Late one night, while studying these quantum patterns, Hyojin made a discovery that changed everything. The explosion had not just destroyed the Vex flagship, it had somehow merged Jiwoo's dying brain patterns with the alien quantum network. But instead of being absorbed like other species, Jiwoo's consciousness had done something impossible. Human minds were different from other species in ways that even humans did not fully understand. When most beings died, their consciousness simply faded away. But Jiwoo's mind had adapted to the quantum environment. She had not been consumed by the collective consciousness. Instead, she had learned to control it. The laboratory suddenly filled with a strange blue light that seemed to come from nowhere. Hyojin looked up from her computer screens and saw something that made her heart stop. A figure was materializing in the center of the room like a ghost becoming solid. It was Jiwoo, but not exactly as she had been in life. She looked the same. Height, same face, same black hair tied back in a ponytail. But her eyes now held depths that seemed to contain entire star systems. When she moved, the air around her shimmered like heat. Waves and tiny sparks of energy danced along her skin. "Hello, Dr. Hyojin," Jiwoo said, and her voice carried strange harmonics that seemed to echo from multiple dimensions. "I have been waiting for you to understand." Hyojin could barely speak. "You are dead. I saw the explosion, we all did. How are you here?" "Death is not what we thought it was," Jiwoo replied. She walked closer, and with each step, her form became more solid. "The Vex network connects all consciousness in the galaxy. When I died, my mind fell into that network, but it did not dissolve. Instead, it grew stronger. How is that possible?" Hyojin whispered. "Because humans are different," Jiwoo said, sitting down in a chair that moments before had been empty. "Other species, when they join the collective, lose their individual thoughts. They become part of the whole. But human consciousness is too stubborn to give up. We adapt instead of surrendering." Jiwoo raised her hand, and energy flowed between her fingers like liquid light I can access. "The memories and knowledge of every being connected to the network. I know the battle plans of every Vex commander, the location of every secret base, the weakness of every biomechanical warrior. But that is not the most important thing I learned," Jiwoo continued. "The Vex have a fatal flaw. They are so dependent on their network that they cannot exist without it. If I can sever their connection to the collective consciousness, they will become nothing more than broken machines." Hyojin felt hope rising in her chest for the first time in months. "Can you do that? Can you cut them off from their network?" "Not all at once," Jiwoo said, "but I can do it slowly. World by world, base by base. Each time I destroy one of their installations, I also damage the network connections in that area. The Vex in those regions become weaker, less coordinated, more afraid. That explains why they have stopped advancing." Hyojin said. "They are too busy trying to protect what they have left." "Exactly. Jiwoo stood up and her form began to flicker again. But I need your help. The collective consciousness is vast and I am still learning to navigate it. I need you to build me a quantum anchor, something that will help me maintain my connection to normal space while I work in the network. What kind of anchor? Hyejin asked, already thinking about the possibilities. A device that can broadcast quantum signals across multiple dimensions. Jiwoo said, if you can build it, I can use it to appear anywhere in the galaxy instantly. I can coordinate attacks with the human resistance and help other enslaved species break free from Vex control. Hyejin nodded. I can do that. I have been working with quantum technology for years, but it will take time to build something that powerful. We have time. Jiwoo said. The Vex are paralyzed by fear right now. They do not understand what I am, and that terrifies them. They have spent centuries conquering other species, but they have never faced an enemy like me. As she spoke, Jiwoo's form began to fade again. I must go now. There are 3 Vex supply convoys heading toward the Altair system. If I can destroy them, it will cut off reinforcements to 12 different worlds. Wait, Hyejin called out. Will I see you again? Yes. Jiwoo smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the young pilot who had volunteered for the suicide mission. I am not gone, Dr. Hyejin. I am just different now, and I am not alone in the network. There are others, consciousness from species, the Vex thought. They had completely absorbed. Some of them are learning to resist just like I did. With that, Jiwoo vanished, leaving only a faint smell of ozone in the air. Hyejin stood alone in her laboratory, but she no longer felt hopeless. The Vex had made a terrible mistake when they created their collective consciousness. They had connected every mind in the galaxy, but they had never considered what would happen if some of those minds refused to be controlled. Working through the night, Hyejin began designing the quantum anchor that would give Jiwoo even more power to fight back. As she worked, she could feel something changing in the galaxy itself. The collective consciousness that had been the Vex greatest weapon was slowly becoming their greatest weakness. Across Vex, space commanders reported increasing system failures. Biomechanical warriors were becoming unreliable, and some were even refusing orders. The network that had made them invincible was now filled with rebel consciousness that fought against Vex control from within. The war was about to change in ways no one could have imagined. Jiwoo had returned from death, not as a ghost seeking revenge, but as something far more dangerous. She had become the virus in the Vex system, the one thing their technology could not defend against human stubbornness and the refusal to give up. The galaxy held its breath as the real battle was about to begin. The Vex home system was unlike anything humans had ever seen. 3 dying stars orbited around a massive black hole, and floating between them was a structure so large it defied imagination. The Overmind was bigger than most moons, a twisted mass of biomechanical tissue and quantum processors that pulsed with ancient intelligence. Commander Taeho led the combined human fleet toward this nightmare. Each ship carried fighters and soldiers from dozens of liberated worlds. The crystalline beings flew beside human pilots while marsh dwellers operated heavy weapons alongside former Vex hybrids who had joined the rebellion. But everyone knew that the real battle would not be fought with ships or weapons. Jiwoo had evolved beyond physical form and now existed as pure consciousness within the quantum realm. She would face the Overmind in a dimension where thoughts became weapons and willpower determined victory or defeat. As the fleet approached, the Vex home system, space itself began to change. Reality bent and twisted around the Overmind, creating impossible geometries where up and down had no meaning. Stars appeared to be in multiple locations at once, and time flowed differently in different areas. Jiwoo materialized on the bridge of Taeho's flagship one last time. Her form was more energy than matter, now crackling with power that hurt to look at directly. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Overmind knows I'm coming, she said. It has been preparing for this battle since the moment I first entered the collective consciousness. This creature has lived for over 10,000 years and has absorbed the knowledge of millions of species. What are you going to do? Taeho asked, though. He already feared the answer. I am going to offer it a choice, Jiwoo replied. Either it releases every consciousness it has enslaved, or I will destroy the entire collective network. The Overmind believes that unity through force is the only way for life to survive in the universe. I will show it that diversity and freedom are stronger. The battle began as soon as the human fleet entered weapon range. Thousands of Vex ships poured out from hidden bases around the system. But these were not the coordinated forces that had once conquered worlds. Many of the biomechanical pilots were confused and frightened. Their connection to the Overmind was being disrupted by Jiwoo's presence. Taeho watched as his fighters engaged the enemy, while Jiwoo began her transformation. Her physical form dissolved into pure light and energy, then expanded outward until she filled the space between stars. The entire star system lit up with her presence. The Overmind responded by manifesting its own consciousness in the quantum realm. It appeared as a vast spider-like creature made of living metal and pulsing flesh. Its voice boomed across dimensions, speaking directly into the minds of every being in the system. "You are a mistake. Human consciousness, the Overmind, said individual thought leads only to chaos and destruction. I have brought order to the galaxy by uniting all minds under my control. You have brought slavery." Jiwoo replied, her voice echoing from 1,000 different points in space. "True strength comes from beings choosing to work together, not being forced to think the same thoughts." The philosophical battle became physical as the two vast intelligences clashed in the quantum realm. Space-time itself warped around them, creating gravity waves that shook planets in distant star systems. The human fleet had to retreat to a safe distance as reality became unstable. The Overmind attacked with the combined knowledge and power of every species it had ever absorbed. It showed Jiwoo visions of civilizations that had destroyed themselves through war and greed. It argued that only unity of thought could prevent such disasters, but Jiwoo countered with her own visions. She showed the Overmind examples of cooperation between different species of art and music and literature created by minds that thought in completely different ways. She demonstrated that diversity made life stronger, not weaker, as they battled. The collective consciousness began to change. The enslaved minds within. The network started to stir as Jiwoo's influence spread. Some began to remember who they had been before conversion. Others simply began to question the orders they received. The Overmind felt its control slipping and grew desperate. It launched a massive attack trying to overwhelm Jiwoo with pure quantum force. But she did not try to match its power. Instead, she did something the ancient intelligence had never expected. She opened herself completely to every consciousness in the collective network. Not to control them as the Overmind did, but to offer them a choice. For the first time in millennia, millions of enslaved minds could decide their own fate. The effect was immediate. Across the galaxy, Vex installations shut down as biomechanical. Warriors chose to disconnect from the network. Some chose to remain linked but as free individuals rather than slaves. Others decided to return to their original species, if that was still possible. The Overmind shrieked as its carefully constructed empire collapsed. The creature had existed for thousands of years by forcing unity on unwilling minds, but now those same minds were choosing freedom. The ancient intelligence felt true fear for the first time. In desperation, the Overmind tried one final attack. It attempted to destroy the entire collective consciousness rather than lose control of it. If it could not rule, then nothing would survive. But Jiwoo was ready for this. Instead of trying to stop the destruction, she embraced it and transformed it. Rather than letting the network die, she rewrote its fundamental nature. The collective consciousness became something new, a voluntary connection that beings could join or leave as they chose. The Overmind found itself transformed as well. No longer the master of enslaved minds, it became simply another consciousness within the network. It retained its vast knowledge and experience but could no longer force its will on others. Throughout the galaxy, the changes were immediate. Biomechanical warriors who chose freedom began removing their artificial parts and rediscovering their original natures. Vex installations became centers of learning and cooperation rather than conquest. Some former Vex chose to remain biomechanical, but used their enhanced abilities to help rebuild the worlds they had once destroyed. Others became teachers, sharing the knowledge they had gained during their time in the collective. Jiwoo felt the transformation complete and knew her work was done. She began to fade from the quantum realm, but not into nothingness. Instead, she became part of the new network itself, a guardian presence that would watch over the galaxy. Taeho saw her appear one final time on his ship, but now she was translucent and shimmering with starlight. "The war is over," she said, smiling the same smile he remembered from the young pilot who had volunteered for that desperate mission. "Will we see you again?" he asked. "I will always be here," she replied. "But differently I am, part of the network now, part of every conscious being that chooses to connect humanity. Will never face extinction alone again." She faded away, becoming one with the quantum field that connected all free minds in the galaxy. The girl who had died to save a single space station had become something greater, a symbol of hope and freedom that would guide the galaxy toward a better future. The war was won not through conquest, but through the simple human belief that every mind deserved the right to choose its own path. Whispers in the dark 3 months had passed since Jiwoo died in the explosion that destroyed the Vex flagship. Commander Taeho now led the human resistance from a hidden base on the moon of Titan. The loss of their brave pilot still hurt everyone who knew her. But they had to keep fighting. Strange reports started coming in from across the galaxy. Refugee ships that escaped from Vex-controlled worlds brought impossible stories. They spoke of explosions on enemy planets of entire Vex military, bases simply vanishing overnight. The alien invaders who had been moving steadily toward Earth suddenly stopped advancing. Captain Young-sik sat in his small stealth ship reading these reports. He was one of the best reconnaissance pilots in the human fleet. His job was to sneak into enemy territory and gather information without being seen. His ship was painted black and covered with special materials that made it nearly invisible to Vex sensors. The strangest report came from the world of New Sol, a human colony that the Vex had captured 6 months ago. According to escaped prisoners, a massive Vex fortress there had been completely destroyed from the inside. Security cameras showed a single figure moving through the facility, like a ghost. This person had destroyed dozens of biomechanical warriors without using any weapons that anyone could identify. Young-sik decided to investigate. He flew his stealth ship carefully through Vex space, avoiding their patrol routes. It took him 2 weeks to reach New Sol. When he arrived, he could not believe what he saw. The Vex fortress was a pile of twisted metal, and the ground around it was burned black. He landed his ship in a hidden valley and walked to the destroyed base. The damage was unlike anything he had ever seen. The thick metal walls had been torn apart from the inside as if something with incredible strength had punched through them. Biomechanical warrior remains were scattered everywhere, but they had not been killed by explosions or energy weapons. Young-sik found the security center and managed to recover some video files from the damaged computers. What he saw made his hands shake. The footage showed a human figure moving through the Vex base with impossible speed and grace. The person wore what looked like a pilot suit, but it glowed with its own light. The figure moved like water flowing around obstacles. When Vex warriors fired their plasma weapons at this person, the beams seemed to pass right through them. But when the figure touched the biomechanical soldiers, they fell apart like broken toys. The face was mostly hidden by the helmet, but Young-sik could see enough to know it was a woman. As he watched more footage, Young-sik noticed something that made his heart race. The way this person moved, the way they held their head when thinking, it reminded him of someone he knew. The computer finished analyzing the face, and the result appeared on the screen. Jiwoo Park positive. Identification 97%. Match Young. Sik stumbled backward. This was impossible. Jiwoo had died 3 months ago. He had seen the explosion himself. Everyone had seen it. The entire Vex flagship had been destroyed along with her fighter. But here was video proof that someone who looked exactly like her was destroying Vex installations. Meanwhile, across Vex-controlled space, panic was spreading through the alien ranks. The biomechanical warriors that had conquered hundreds of worlds were experiencing something their species had never known before: fear. Their telepathic network buzzed with confused messages and warnings about the ghost warrior on the world of Kepler 9. A Vex commander named Thakmor received reports that made no sense. 3 of his largest military complexes had been attacked in a single night. The security recordings all showed the same impossible figure. A human female who could walk through walls survived direct plasma hits and destroy biomechanical warriors with her bare hands. Thakmor was one of the oldest Vex commanders. He had lived for over 200 years and had conquered 47 different worlds. He had seen every type of warrior, every kind of weapon, every possible battle tactic. But this ghost warrior was something completely new. The Vex had always won their wars through superior technology and numbers. Their biomechanical bodies were nearly indestructible, and their weapons could destroy entire cities. But this human seemed to ignore all the rules of physics. She appeared and disappeared without warning, moved faster than their sensors could track, and seemed to know exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. What frightened Thakmor most was that the ghost warrior was not trying to kill as many Vex as possible. Instead, she seemed to be targeting their command centers, communication arrays, and weapon factories. It was as if she understood their entire military structure and was systematically taking it apart, piece by piece. Reports came in from dozens of worlds. The pattern was always the same. A single human figure would appear at a heavily defended Vex installation. She would move through their defenses like they did not exist, destroy everything important, and then vanish before reinforcements could arrive. The Vex had tried everything to stop her. They sent their best warriors, used their most powerful weapons, and even called in their massive dreadnought ships. But nothing worked. The ghost warrior always escaped and always struck again somewhere else. Young Sik returned to the human base with his impossible discovery. He showed the video footage to Commander Taeho and the other resistance leaders. The room fell silent as they watched the figure that looked like Jiwoo tear through Vex defenses. "That is not possible," Taeho said quietly. "Jiwoo is dead. We all saw her die, but the evidence was right there on the screen. Someone who looked exactly like their fallen pilot was single-handedly terrorizing the entire Vex empire. The biomechanical invaders who had seemed unstoppable were now afraid to leave their strongest fortresses." Dr. Hyejin, the resistance scientist who studied captured Vex technology, had a theory. She believed that, when Jiwoo crashed into the enemy flagship, something had happened during the explosion. The Vex used quantum technology to link all their warriors together in a telepathic network. Maybe Jiwoo had somehow become connected to this network when she died. If that is true, Hyejin said, then Jiwoo might still be alive in some form. She could be existing as pure consciousness within the Vex quantum system. That would explain how she knows so much about their defenses and why she can appear anywhere in their territory. The idea seemed crazy, but it was the only explanation that made sense. Young Sik volunteered to make contact with the ghost warrior. He would return to Vex space and try to communicate with whatever Jiwoo had become. If she was really still alive somehow, then maybe she could help them win this war. As Young Sik prepared for his dangerous mission, the Vex Empire continued to crumble from within. Their forward positions were being abandoned, their supply lines were under constant attack, and their biomechanical warriors were beginning to malfunction from stress and fear. The Ghost Warrior had become more than just a fighter. She had become a symbol of hope for every enslaved species in the galaxy, and a nightmare for the Vex invaders who had thought themselves invincible. Something that had once been human was hunting them, and they had no idea how to stop it.